All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh, is here. And folks, we have an all star cast today, and we're going to dive into some really intense content. We're going to talk about AI for good and AI for bad. We're going to talk about AI for know your customer and also anti money laundering and, of course, fraud protection in general. And if you've been paying attention in the real world, you know that deep fakes are everywhere these days and they're getting really good. It's kind of hard to tell. Even my daughter, who's 12, is like, oh, that's an AI video, Dad. Don't worry. I'm like, I think that was a real one. It doesn't
Mhm.
matter. But, you know, kids, they're right about everything. So you just have to roll with it. But these new technologies can be used for good or for bad. And we're going to try to figure out how do you use AI for anti-money laundering, for know your customer, what goes into it. There are a lot of things that go into it. And I want to say just a few quick words at the top of the hour. I've been watching this space for a long time now, the data management space in particular. And there are always overlaps between disciplines. So you have things like governance, risk management, compliance, you have security, for example. They all overlap whether you are trying to govern access to your systems, have security controls in place for authentication, whether you're trying to meet with the regulator's demands on the compliance side, uses a lot of the same data, a lot of the same processes, a lot of the same people in some instances. So why are they always disparate disciplines? Maybe because Gartner likes it that way. I don't know. There are lots of different reasons why these things happen. Of course, they evolve over time. But the point is that if you're going to really attack some of the nastiest bad actors, if you're going to protect yourself in these times, especially in financial services where there's a lot of money flying around, but also in other regulated industries, you need a holistic approach to solve this. And we're going to be talking with Matt Vega. He is from Sardine AI. And of course, our good buddy Mark Matson is here from Third Nature as well. We'll get their thoughts on how to do all that. But I just want to frame the problem space that we're dealing with, and it is absolutely vast. So if you look in the description on this YouTube video, you will see a link to the demo that Matt just did, and he changed his eye color in the middle of, of a demo, and he did all kind of other stuff. He actually built out an entire banking website in minutes. So if any of you saw the Salesforce Dreamforce show just yesterday, they were bragging about how you can build these new apps in almost no time. And yeah, the good guys can build apps in no time. So can the bad guys. You can mimic an entire Chase Bank website in minutes. And then he showed how you can even funnel the data to where you as the user are on this fake site and they actually capture they say, "Hey, check your phone for, multi-factor authentication." So you'll check your phone and enter it into the wrong place so they can turn around and enter it into the right place. This is really dangerous stuff. It's kind of freaky when you think about it. But what's cool about Sardine in my research of them, there are a number of different things they've done that's very impressive. One is it is one platform for using AI, for using models, machine learning models to identify patterns, of course, for know your customer, for anti-money laundering. Think about it, for AML, that's very sneaky stuff, and it takes place over a long period of time. Fraud detection, like trying to keep someone out from using your credit card, well, that happens in an instant typically, and you'll get notified, and sometimes it's a false positive. But with anti-money laundering, there's no necessary bar on when the process begins or ends. And so it can take days, it could take weeks, it could take months, it could take years if they're clever enough. So how do you do that? Well, you need to understand the patterns of behavior. You need to understand the people. And the one thing before I throw it over to Matt Vega, that I'll say that also really impressed me about Sardine is they have profiles on devices, 3 billion devices. So if you think about some of these click farms, and I've researched this and I know what's going on, folks, there are click farms all over the world. Well, if you got a phone that's just sitting in one position all the time and it's on, it's clicking on all sorts of different things all day, guess what? It's probably in a click farm because it's not moving. Because your phones, they track where you are. That's how you can check your map. That's how you know where you're on a map and you're turning around and all that stuff. So, like, there are certain profiles of behavior of the devices that are highly indicative of problems. And these folks at Sardine have access to that data and to lots of other data sources as well, which all are brought together to do anti money laundering, know your customer, fraud detection in very intense situations. With that, Matt Vega, welcome to DM Radio. Tell us a bit about Sardine and how it is that you're able to gather all that information and deliver it through this platform.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be here. So, Sardine is basically, excuse me, as you mentioned, an AI-based fraud and AML platform. We work with over 300 leading customers worldwide. We are all over the globe, from the financial industry, so such as banks, FIs, issuers, to e-commerce platforms, to fintechs, to the cryptocurrency. We touch almost every industry as of today. We really help our customers identify and block and protect against for fraud attacks, which is what you first originally described in the intro there, as like those man in the middle attacks, those AI generated websites. And then we also help financial institutions and any type of regulated business mitigate the risks of compliance issues. So that's where the AML side comes, where so we have compliance technologies as well as anti-fraud technologies for businesses around the globe. And what we can do is basically we use behavioral biometrics and device intelligence, which is what you alluded to initially, and that intelligence gives us the ability to identify really unique patterns in human behavior versus bot behavior. Okay. And those are the things that are very interesting to us that allow us over the last many years to develop this massive consortium model and this huge database of really advanced features and capabilities that allow us to identify what is a good user versus a bad user. What
Hmm.
are the behaviors of human activity on a business, on a financial institution, on an e-commerce platform that is indicative of risk? And we use those signals, some of those that you talked about. Is someone copying and pasting social security numbers into a field? How long is it taking them to spell their name? Is their
Hmm.
device moving? Right?
Right.
Is their device face down? So is the phone typing, but it's actually face down? So it's very interesting on how that works, and some of the technology which we can dive into more. But really, what when we look at our customer base and who we're trying to protect, we really work on, especially on onboarding and identity fraud, bot detection, bot protection, right? Look at platform abuse, payments fraud, KYC and identity related issues, compliance, let's just say sanctions, transaction monitoring, SAR filing, you name it, we do it. So that's the all-in-one platform technology as a fraud and risk technology leader. And then when we think about the current ecosystem in the environment, we are really trying to switch from defense to offense. And so that's why we're doing these demos in real time to show people around the world what do the attackers actually have and how are they doing it. What we found historically is a lot of industry leaders talk about the theory of. And they like to talk about the theory of an attack or how these things are working. And it kind of sets a new tone when you actually get to see how it's happening, and more importantly, learn how to do it. And that's why I actually just showed how one of the attacks works, where you can literally just take a screenshot and use AI to emulate it, and actually initiate an attack using that. And by understanding how these attacks work, it allows our customers, our businesses, and individuals, the public, right, to be able to be more aware and start building in stronger defenses against it. And that could be personal for individuals, or it could be, very complex large language models, rule engines, and sophisticated AI models that we have to protect like Fortune 500 companies. So we're seeing a lot from across the industry.
Well, and you bring in lots of different kinds of data. I mean, I alluded to the device data, which is fascinating in and of itself, but you have lots of different data sets that you purchase from various vendors, and then you coalesce all that stuff and use it to understand patterns and to be able to identify signal versus noise, because that's what you're always doing in this kind of scenario, right? You're trying to understand, okay, there's lots and lots of noise. Where is the signal in that noise? And if you get the right model and apply it to a certain set of data, that's going to be obvious, but it takes a fair amount of time and effort to build the models that can identify that, right? Do you want to talk about how you actually build the models over time to ascertain what is signal and what is noise?
Yeah, and it really takes quite, you're exactly right. So, first off, there is a lot of noise in the industry. And in fact, there's this really interesting dichotomy with data and with fraud prevention and compliance, but especially on the fraud side, where you get to a point where you're trying to collect so much information and so much intelligence and data where it actually becomes a net negative versus a net positive. So that's where we've seen companies fail, in particular, in building out their own internal controls. Is what they do is they start collecting so many signals and so many, let's just call it data points on user activity, on checkout rails, on payment rails, on card types, that you start losing the nuance in the most powerful signals to be able to identify what is the likelihood of something being legitimate or fraudulent. And that's where really we've spent many, many years, and our founders are, PhD data scientists, they're industry leaders. We have some, we're very blessed to have incredibly talented founders to help kind of lead the ship and be able to lead the way in the industry to identify these, unique techniques. And so we really focus on observing user behavior, and really around the transaction itself. The analogy that I use in our industry is a lot of companies, what they do is they put a security camera on their front door and they put a security camera on their back door. So if someone wants to rob their house, let's just say their business, you steal something using stolen credit cards, for example, they will a lot of times see the account login. Right. So that's that security, how that individual entered their house. And then they will see what happened at the time of checkout. So that's the back
Mm,
door. Right. What they won't see is what the user is doing in your house. What is that robber? What drawers are they opening? Right. What items are they trying to get at? Right. What is their journey throughout your house? Are they avoiding cameras? Are they hiding behind walls? Right. What's their activity? And that's really critical in the space to be able to understand that entire 360-degree life cycle of both good users and bad users. Right.
mm,
And that's where these really powerful signals work. And that's where we really go deep into the device environments, right? And we go, and you talked about those billions of devices that we have on our network. That's really our bread and butter, is our ability to, we have risk scored a lot of powerful devices. And that also is to improve user experience. It's not
mhm,
just to block bad users, because when you are a normal everyday person and you are using, the Amazons of the world and e-commerce platforms and whatnot, and many of them are our customers, you will be able to we will be able to create a healthy pattern on you to show this individual is trustworthy. There's nothing bad. There's no nefarious activity, and the our customers will be able to reduce their controls and restrictions to improve your user experience, have
mm.
rapid checkouts, right? So the technology for fraud prevention can not only be used to increase friction and block bad actors, but it could also be used to actually improve your user experience.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I'll use that to pivot to Mark Madsen. Mark, you've been in this industry for a long time too, and you've worked in the analytics space, AI, of course, the data space. All this data really comes into play, but everything can change. So someone can have a good positive profile. Okay, this is a good person, and then their phone gets hacked, and someone takes the phone, and now they're using it. You can detect changes in behavior. The question is, all right, is that a normal change in behavior or is that an abnormal change in behavior? It's hard to tell. I'm a little bit frustrated, honestly, and thinking about the telcos. I get so many text messages now that are obviously fraudulent. There's this whole new tactic of, hey, you want to meet at the gym later on? Or why didn't you call me back? And it's like, okay, number I've never seen before, area code I've never seen before, block. Block the number, but it's just everywhere. And I think that's the key, right, Marcus? That you have to take this very seriously if you're on the enterprise side, because the black hats have tremendous power these days. But Mark, what do you think?
Trying to figure out what the question was, Eric.
What do you think in general about what's happening out here? What is we only got
Yeah, I
three
mean,
three and a half minutes in this segment, so
it's
I
we
know it's a
got so
hard one.
much chaos going on now, and uh, it, too much data was a problem when I worked in uh, stock market fraud back in the late 90s, because that was my couple of years, right? And it's not much different now. We have better computers. We've got more interesting statistical models. We have all kinds of stuff now that we didn't have then, but the data kept pace. And so, spurious signal or inability to detect signal, because a lot of this stuff, you really think about it, it's the needle in a haystack. And, you've got two approaches. You can either look for needles in the haystack, or you can try to figure out what hay looks like and get rid of the hay and then look at what's left.
Hmm.
And that's basically your approaches. And this is all just sifting data and either looking for it or filtering it out.
Hmm.
And now we're just throwing on the ability to create all kinds of new interesting fake data, like these, device emulators or simply, devices that are pretending to be you. And you've got to come up with new ways to detect and manage that stuff. So I'm kind of interested in, how do you create a device profile? And how do you, kind of uniquely track that thing so that you're not saying that Eric's phone and my phone are the same phone and oh, we're going to disable your bank login. How does that work?
Yeah,
Yeah,
flip it over to
I'm
Matt.
happy. Yeah, I'm happy to dive into it. And at a high level for this segment in particular, basically we are combining literally hundreds, if not thousands, in some cases, data points. So there's things called device IDs, so IMEI, IMSI, IMSIs, right? That's at a high level. Those are the unique manufacturer signatures of, call it, the serial numbers of the device. So that one is the IMEI, that is basically a unique identifier of the device. IMSI is the IMSI, that is the unique identifier of the chip that's being used, right? So the SIM card, even the virtual SIM cards have IMSIs, by the way. Those are really high level indicators of what is a device. Now, there's very easy ways to spoof that. So you then have to go into and create a device ID. And what a device ID is that could either be a unique identifier like an IMEI, or it could be a combination of those. So it's a internal logic that a company like Sardine will create to enhance that identifier to make sure that those unique signals are all aligning and triangulating to confirm that the device is the device that we have detected. Now, that's very high level. Then you go into the literally thousands of signals that we get across the entire space, including those behavioral signals that we talked about, including really unique device characteristics, right? How many pixels are in the phone? What is the screen size,
Oh,
right?
wow.
Your user behavior, your patterns, your the camera type, right? Also the language of the device and the language of the browser. So those are all
Right.
signals that we use.
Let's put a pin in that. We'll come right back, folks. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Matt Vega of Sardine and Mark Madsen of Third Nature. And Matt, you were just giving a high level view. You made a number of really interesting points there of the device data that you can capture in trying to understand what's happening out there. What kind of phone is it? How many pixels are on it? What's the behavioral pattern? I mean, there are so many of these patterns. A lot of people have what's it called? Google, like it tracks your where you've been basically, and you can allow it to do that. And it's like, okay, the pattern is here, then it's there, then it's here, then it's there. And if it goes way over here and stays over there for a long period of time, okay, did he lose the phone? Wait, the phone's being used now. That's a problem, right? So there are all these different things you can you can identify. I guess the challenge is, how do you build an architecture where you know which model to hit when and what to do about that, and that gets into the nature of the platform itself, right? Do you want to talk about, well, maybe first let's get into the lower level version of what you were just discussing. The high level version is that you have all this device on all this data on these devices. So you can kind of track that. When it gets into the weeds, what are some of the grittier things that you're able to do? You mentioned like the number of pixels and other little tidbits about the actual device. Tell us a bit about that and how that comes into play.
Sure, yeah, happy to. And really what it comes down to is, and I would call it, Sardine's bread and butter, is our ability to combine these data points in a very unique way to be able to create an incredibly powerful tracking signal or fingerprint called the device fingerprint to allow us to maintain eyes on these threat actors, right? These bad actors in the industry. And that includes anomalous behavior, which is what you just mentioned, Eric, right? Where you have an individual or a device that is looks normal, and it's actually the pattern of life, right? The pattern of behavior looks normal, and then all of a sudden it goes off the rails, right? And you see this very unusual, anomalous behavior that could be a sign of, for example, malware on the device, and someone has remotely taken over the device, which we can talk about. There's all sorts of interesting attack vectors there. It could have been sold, it could have been stolen. So there's all sorts of ways that we do it. And at the granular level, really what we're looking for is one, we really tap into data consortium models primarily, including our own, to combine these signals. And the reason why we do that, to get into the granular weeds without giving out the secret sauce, of course, is the device emulators in the world are incredibly powerful. And what I mean by that are these black hats, the bad actors, the fraudsters of the world, they use both open source and dark web-based source, right? So called closed source, access to information and data points that allow them to trick the companies and the corporations of the world to think that they are in a different location. For example, they think that they're in Colorado, right? And they can do that through even simple VPN and proxies, right?
Wow.
And being able to hide their geolocation and hide characteristics about their device. So, for example, they might not want us to know that they are really on an iPhone, but they're using a remote desktop server, right? Or
Wow.
they are, using a virtual machine, or just like what I'm doing right now, where I'm actually piping in an AI-based video injection to change my eye color. So my eye color on this video right now is live. I'm actually using AI right now as we speak. So it's incredibly nuanced. And so we have to really go deep into these signals, into these intrinsic behaviors that we see on a daily basis to help us identify what is actually a legitimate user or a legitimate device and what is trying to be spoofed, right? Who is actually getting the cloth over our eyes or trying to go after our customers. So without giving out the secret sauce, those are kind of how those signals work.
That's wild. We do have a couple questions from our audience, our studio audience here. One is asking, do you need any specialized hardware client side for this, or only an internet connection to an AI engine? How does an AI engine client side change this? Can you talk about that, or any other angles? And also, he's asking, any chip enabled workstations, or tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, and is the question specific? I imagine the question is specifically around like what I'm using currently
Right.
and some of these deep fakes. The answer is no. However, you do need a minimum hardware requirement, and sometimes that's trial and error. It really depends on the size of the model that you're using and how much computing power you need. Those deepfakes. So, for example, your average MacBook, Apple product could easily run these models without any type of enhancement. In Windows systems, you're definitely going to need a certain amount of CPUs, GPUs to be able to power these, right? And some of it, again, it's really model based, but I can tell you that the average device, especially modern smartphones, and any type of modern device, especially on the Apple side, or call it the nicer Windows systems, those are all going to very easily run these models. And most of them are just they're based out of Python. Some of them are AI models like what I showed on V0. Those on the open source AI models, those you can do with anything. You can use Windows 98 if you really wanted to, as long as you can access the internet. Because all of the computing power is happening on the models and the servers of these AI hosts, right? So nothing is happening on device except for those when we're doing those deep fakes. And in this case, right, when I'm using AI to change my eye color, and there's a couple of tricks that I didn't talk about about my facial characteristics that I changed for this video. I do not have any hardware acceleration happening right now. I do not have any special device, changes that have allowed me to do this in real time and make it look smooth and real. And that's just a simple MacBook Pro.
That's interesting. We got another question from the audience. Um, updates from Apple recently. That's the other side of the equation, right? Is that Samsung will do things, Apple will do things, the manufacturers do things. And of course, the good guys have to track that and map their software development to it. And the bad guys can too. Tell us what happened recently and why it's important.
Yeah, it's an amazing question, and most people are not even aware of this. So recently, in September, when Apple did their new iOS release, and basically what they did is Apple is really a privacy security first company, so they are constantly changing their security and privacy logic in their new software updates. And just recently, what has happened is basically they have changed some of the privacy and security updates around being able to track or present certain data characteristics about the device. And that has caused is that has caused a real problem for certain vendors in our space, in the protection space, right? In the cybersecurity space, to be able to accurately identify and track those devices, because Apple is now basically preventing that activity, or it's much more challenging now based on the type of technology that you're using to track those bad devices or track those good devices, right? And the device
Wow.
signals. Luckily, though, with Sardine, because we use so many data points and we have so many data consortium models and we have 60 plus vendors that we pipe data in real time, even pretty significant changes to the Apple logic does not impact us. The other side of it is because we're very heavily behavioral based. Behavior will not change even with an iOS update. So that has allowed us to get through a lot of these, even the more advanced security controls to prevent sharing and cross tracking, et cetera. We're still able to protect our customers around the globe because of the fact that we have that intrinsic capability to pipe in all of those thousands of data points to create a really unique identifiable signal to help protect all of your customers.
Hmm. That's very interesting. And maybe Mark Madsen, I'll bring you back in. Triangulating data points is always central to understanding what's really happening. I think Matt makes a good point here that when you have multiple data points coming in, even if you lose one signal, two signals, if you have 10, 12 others, you're still doing pretty well. And that's what you need to be doing. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on that as a strategy?
I mean, a lot of things hinge around de-anonymizing, right? The
That's right.
scary part of some of this is that the same things you need to secure are are what can be abused to surveil, right?
That's right.
Whether it's, government surveillance, but criminal surveillance. Somebody wants to target the chief financial officer, or maybe not him, but like somebody in the middle of the finance organization who does funds transfers, right? Now, if you have the same ability to detect that you do to surveil, then eventually you're ahead, then the black hats are ahead, and then it's just like it sounds like it's just a constant and ongoing arms race. So I'm curious though, I had a slightly different question is that, this arms race is obviously going on. And, one of the questions is with all of the kind of AI tools, like you're describing for various just things to aid an attack or code generation or whatever, um, do you see the overall volume of attacks increasing? And is that distribution at all tied to just enabling more script kiddies to try and do what you can already detect? Or is the distribution shifted towards the more sophisticated attackers with novel things?
Yeah, that's an amazing question. The call it the wide adoption of AI has completely changed the game for fraud prevention and security.
Mm,
And the reason for that is before, in order to facilitate and initiate these advanced attack methods that we used to see, right? These extremely high velocity loon attacks, these extremely high velocity bin attacks, these man in the middle attacks that are very sophisticated to be able to funnel those OTP and MFA type challenges through. You really needed to be a cybersecurity professional or a software engineer to effectively execute on those attacks.
mm,
Nowadays, you could be a 14-year-old kid using no code and just simple prompts on AI. So, to answer your question, it is a strong yes. we are seeing an exponential increase in attacks across the entire globe. And it's really interesting because the cases that we see, if you track it at a global level, which we do, Asia tends to be call it the testing grounds of some of these attack vectors. So it'll usually come out of the Asia territory, and then they will start attempting these attack vectors through South America. And so they come up through Brazil and through Mexico, and some of it is they're kind of looking for the path of least resistance because they know by the time they get to Europe and Australia and, for example, United States, you're going to be dealing with companies that have very large security and counter fraud budgets, and they're going to have really good control. So they almost like are testing their capabilities in some of these areas that they think maybe have less controls, right? Or less of a budget to protect themselves. So by the time they get to us, they are highly sophisticated and they have fine-tuned their craft. And to answer your question, I think that really what we're seeing is the bar of entry has been the lowest it's ever been before. And you don't even need to be a script kiddie anymore to be able to do these attacks, right? So that's the scary thing is like, you can execute an attack like this in 3 or 4 days of just reading online, right? You don't need to have any type of sophisticated knowledge or even just at the script level, right? And so we are seeing that. And then the really scary thing is the attackers that do have those skill sets are now supercharged. Right. So the attackers in these more sophisticated rings that really had a variety of capabilities before and were able to execute on these more advanced techniques, now they've got AI to, supercharge their capabilities. And so we're in this really unique space in the industry. And this is both in a cybersecurity perspective and counter fraud and compliance perspective, where it really takes AI to defend against AI. Like we're actually in that space right now as we speak. We have AI models running today that are actually fighting in the cyber hemisphere AI. So it's AI against AI that's happening right now as we speak.
Yeah, and there are layers to this. I think that's what you're
That's
alluding
right.
to, right? You've got lots of different models, and some of them are tracking overall behavior, some are tracking behavior in certain domains. I'll just give you a couple examples, and we'll dive deep into them after the next break here. But Chase Bank and Network Solutions, I've had some pretty sophisticated attacks from both of them recently. One of them was saying, "Oh, hey, you're about to lose your merchant access because of XYZ." I'm like, well, that's kind of strange. And so there's a number on there, and it was the real Chase number. So I called the Chase number. I'm like, all right, I think this is, a bit goofy. And they're like, oh, I don't see anything trouble on your account and this and that. And so it's like, wow, that was pretty sophisticated. Because they were just going to, I thought they were going to shut off my merchant account. I'm like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make sense. But then Network Solutions is another one. Oh, you have to identify because of X, Y, and Z, and it looks just exactly like a Network Solutions email blast. I'm like, huh, I think this is also a scam. A lot of times you can look at the from address and it's some goofy address because they're co-opting. I mean, we use a guy because we do a lot of email marketing. We have a guy who really gets down on DMARC and some of these other requirements now to be able to lock down. So if someone does something screwy, it shows up pretty quickly and he can flag it and say, hey, they're trying to use your account and you can take action. But that's pretty sophisticated. Not every person in the world knows about these kinds of services. And, email, it gets pretty complicated when you get down into the weeds, despite the fact that there are billions and billions of them flying around the interwebs. But the point is, this stuff is everywhere these days. And I have definitely noticed an increase just anecdotally on my phone with the chat messages in my email with very convincing layout and design and storylines behind it. So all this stuff is coming together to cause some real problems. But folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, talking to Matt Vega of Sardine.ai and Mark Matson of Third Nature. And Matt, financial crime units are working overtime to deal with this. Obviously, you mentioned you're doing the same thing. You got AI fighting AI. Tell us how the financial crime units are operating and what their sort of black ops are.
Yeah. And we're seeing this not only in the financial services sector, call it the fintechs of the world, the crypto of the world, and more importantly, the large banks of the world, but we're really seeing this across almost every ecosystem is being impacted because like we talked about before, that entry bar is so low now. it is forcing companies to adopt a much more advanced posture than they were before with countering these types of threats, right? Because now, just like you said with your merchant account, literally everyone is at risk these days, right? You're really never protected. Everyone's identity has already been stolen. All of us on this call, for example, I guarantee you I can find your identity on the dark web right now as we speak. So assuming that your information has already been stolen and assuming that you're going to be attacked, right? Even the NSA, for example, had some hackers that were sitting in their servers. A dude named Cozy Bear was sitting in their servers for 6 months without them knowing. So even the world-class cybersecurity experts will get hacked. So that requires you to really double down on your controls and how you kind of hedge your risks, right? And so some of the things that we're seeing is, especially with AI use in particular, is one is on the onboarding and merchant risk side. We're seeing, there's something called open source intelligence, and open source intelligence was used in a kind of a high level way, but it's being much more fine-tuned now in the financial services sector and really across the industry. And so, for example, at Sardine, we have open source intelligence research agents. And what that is those are AI agents, and that's using Agentic AI to basically go out and collect information from open sources, the open web, in real time, and consolidate it for you to help give you a kind of, call it, public view of this particular device, of this particular, call it the device, the customer, the behavior. And more importantly, like, is this information valid or is it real, right? If this person is pretending to be, John Smith from Austin, Texas, but we're seeing all of these signals that they're actually based in Florida and their characteristics aren't matching what John Smith does, or we've de-risked John Smith before historically. Those are kind of the things that you look for, and then you try to find these things called a pattern of life. And what a pattern of life is you use open source tools. By the way, bad actors use them too, right? Where you're using all of these open source data from the open web to gather and kind of create a much more fine-tuned, fine-tuned intelligence about the decision you're going to make. So that's one use case. Some of the other use cases that we're seeing is around using AI for example, code generation. So one of the things that Mark and I have talked about historically also is like rule engines. And rule engines are still incredibly relevant today. In fact, the vast majority of the industry is still always running off of rule engines. Where AI is intersecting with rule engines is the ability to now actually use AI to create enhanced rule engines and create rules without actually having to use code or even understanding the language that you would need to develop a more sophisticated code base. And so, for example, if a financial issuer is under a BIN attack, right, or some sort of card emulation attack, or a Loon algorithm attack, where a model is actually replicating their cards using the Loon algorithm, what AI could do is you could go and say, "Hey, I'm under attack. Can you, help me write let's just say, help me write 5 new rules that will help me mitigate this attack and keep the decline rate, let's just say, below 10%, right? Just using that as a ballpark. Some of the agents that, like, for example, we've developed will do that in real time, will back test it for you, will tell you what the likely impact is on your good traffic, and you can go live in seconds. So that is a key, cross between that. And one of the things that's also really interesting is how the financial services sector, especially the regulators, have really changed their opinion on AI use and agentic. And we really closely work with the U.S. government to be able to kind of monitor their recommendations, their changes, how they're enforcing these rules and regulations. And recently, we've seen this really big shift in the financial services sector, where the OCC and FDIC are now approving AI and agentic use in the banks. So there are absolutely banks today that have passed their financial regulatory exams without any problems. And the key delineation that we're finding is this key delineation between, are you using AI to generate net new content or are you using AI to automate or consolidate information? And it's that latter that we tend to see right now in the financial services sector being approved by the financial examiners because you're following a similar model governance pattern that you would before. And so at Sardine, for example, like we've created multiple white papers on how companies and financial institutions can implement a lot of these AI type tools and do it in a let's just call it a de-risk that process of implementing it and do it in a way to where they'll still be able to pass even the most in-depth financial audits. So kind of pausing there. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's some pretty deep stuff, man. I am glad to hear because regulators tend to move kind of slowly,
That's right.
right? I mean, they're not really at the cutting edge, but they're certainly seeing that there are these use cases and this has to be addressed. So if I understood you correctly, what you're saying is that the regulators are now going easy if you're using AI for certain use cases, but not for others, not to generate new content, for example, because this stuff is generative. I mean, there are all sorts of stories now about how it just makes up citations and it always sounds convincing, but it isn't. But there is an interesting angle on Gen AI in this context that I think might work well with your existing stack and work well at what I mean is that you guys can identify it. Gen AI makes stuff up. So if it makes up something wrong about Mark Madsen's past or his history or his profile, you can identify that. I mean, how deep can you get, Matt, in terms of understanding small details about individuals of their profile and flag that? How quickly can you address that kind of thing? You got 3 minutes. Go ahead.
Yeah, great. So it's a fantastic question. So first, I want to answer the question by delineating between a generative AI large language models and something called agentic AI.
Hmm.
The best way, they all use similar model frameworks as Mark can talk about, I'm sure, much better than I can. However, at a high level, what you can think of agentic AI, these AI agents that we're discussing, right, is it's really an automation technology at heart. So it's automation on steroids. You're basically trying to use agentic agents to complete a particular task. So, and I'm getting to the answer your question, but basically, like what we're seeing is we talked about those onboarding and merchant risk type agents that we've developed. What you're doing is basically what would have taken, let's just say 5-10 minutes to onboard a particular customer can now be done in a matter of seconds because you're able to, with a very high degree of accuracy, basically emulate what a cybersecurity professional or fraud prevention professional, an analyst would do in the wild. So agentic AI in particular is really leading the charge in our ability to kind of automate at an extremely high level of efficiency. It's on the generative side that becomes tricky, right? Because on the generative side is when you have those hallucinations that you're talking about, right?
Hmm.
And so having that kind of clear delineation, which is something that Sardine has extensive experience in that we can help our customers with, is how do you implement these models effectively to be able to have it replicatable, have it be able to pass through stringent financial audits, right? And there's techniques that need to go into place around your model governance and how you treat this framework to make sure that you limit those hallucinations as much as possible.
Yeah, and we got our podcast bonus segment coming up here in a minute, but I'll just throw out one comment. Maybe we can dig into it. I mean, one of the things that you've kind of hinted at is the ability to detect how fast someone's typing their name in, for example, or how fast this form is filled out. And if it's filled out in 1 second, well, a human didn't do that, right? So you can tell the difference depending upon your level of visibility into the browser, for example, or into the phone. If things are moving really, really quickly, that doesn't look too good. All
That's
these
right.
fields got filled at the same time. I don't think grandma types that fast, right? But the question is, how much detail can you get in a short period of time, which you can then act on and do something about? And the answer I'm hearing from you from a sardine perspective is a lot, because you have lots of different sources of information. I think that's probably one of the key differentiators for you because if you lose the signal or that, you still have enough signal. It's
That's
like
right.
if your kid puts her hand on your eyes, you're driving, you still got the other eye, and you can
That's
still
right.
get around the obstacles. But folks, podcast bonus segment is coming up. We'll be right back here listening to DM Radio. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on DM Radio with Matt Vega. That's Vega of Sardine and Mark Madsen of Third Nature. And Mark, why don't you throw a question over at Matt?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of topics. We've kind of gone wide, and just within the narrower range of AI, which personally to me it's a big umbrella, right? It's not
Sure.
just LLMs, but 99% of the time people say LLMs, and that's kind of Matt was talking about other things that might actually have logic in them. But one thing you said I was kind of curious about, just because I don't follow the banking regs very closely, and that's that they actually got approvals for some of the language model based stuff. Because number one, uh, eh, language models, like you said, consolidation versus generation. But if you use a language model to consolidate, it's still generating because it's not actually consolidating and picking bits out. It is restating and generating that stuff, which just seems like kind of a risky thing. Um,
Good point.
so what context is this stuff being used? Is it related to the security side of things?
Yeah, so and here is first off, what you just said is like a really powerful statement. So I don't want to skip over it because I thought it was incredibly important. And what you said is basically the argument. And by the way, this is really a philosophy debate. What I'm going to get into just for a second here is it really generating new content? And I'll give you an example. And because you're right, these models are always generating. So it's not actually consolidating ever. It's always generating, right? But the use case is consolidation, for example, right?
Right.
However, to use an analogy on these models is, for example, if a model were to create, let's just say a large language model or some sort of AI-based model, right, were to create a new song, right? So like these AI models that are creating music, just as an example, right? If all they're doing is they're going out and looking at the millions of different songs that they have heard that they were trained on, and they were taking pieces of those songs and restitching it together to create something net new, is that actually generating new content, or is that actually consolidating certain data points about those other songs? So again, this is just a philosophy type conversation, is like, if you is music are you actually creating something new, or are you just creating a new version of something that already exists? So from a financial institution standpoint, that's kind of the mental model that we use, is really
Mhm.
that use case of what you're trying to do with those models is incredibly important in order to set you up to pass a financial and regulatory exam. So if you're using some of these, let's just say like an open AIs of the world, like a chat GPT, and you're using it to ask really general open questions where almost every time you prompt it, you're going to get a different response. You're going to have a lot of challenges getting through these financial and regulatory exams if you're using it in a part of your business that requires regulatory overwatch, right? Now, if you are let's just say an AML agent, right, or an analyst, I should say in this case, or you're a fraud prevention analyst and you're at, the Chase Banks of the world, right? Your normal day to day is you're going to be stuck in queues for just hours a day trying to get through these alerts and all of these signals that are getting popped up because there's anomalous behavior and activity and new devices logging into accounts. And they have humans. I mean, these companies spend billions of dollars a year to protect their customers, and rightfully so, because of the landscape. But what AI is allowing them to do now, is using tools like Sardine, is being able to, number one, speed up the entry into identifying what is the most important signals that I need to get my eyes on today. So that's one really interesting use case, is being able to escalate the already escalated in the queue even further to say, hey, this model, based on the risk signals that we built this model for, is identifying that this type of transaction user behavior is the most indicative of a financial crime, a loss, a regulatory violation, and this should take priority. So it's really that mental model of how you're thinking through the use of AI and agentic AI and what problem you're trying to solve. It's one of those areas where you don't really want to put the cart before the horse. You really want to identify the problem problem that you're trying to solve, and then use the right model and the right size model to solve it. Right. And so some of these things is they're using the wrong models in some cases that I've seen. And MIT did a really fascinating paper on this around how some of these agentic programs and businesses have failed. And most of the time, it's really because, and there was logic that was incorrect. I think, Mark, even you mentioned this. There was a lot of logic that was, potentially, some of the way that they functioned or the way that the study was done wasn't may have had some gaps. But really, what we see in the industry is we see that it's really one a CEO saying you will use AI. Right, to their business, and then what they do is they implement these models, and they're really trying to come up with a solution without knowing what the problem is. And so
Yeah.
really kind of reframing that to say, here's our problem. We're stuck in manual reviews. We're stuck in queues. We have too many transaction alerts happening on a day-to-day basis. How do we actually kind of speed that up, automate, enhance our team and workforce to be able to get through more and be able to serve our customers better? And that's where Sardine's Agentic AI products can really help, especially on the fraud and AML compliance side. And then lastly, to the final piece, it is really around how do you effectively scale this in a way to where the big industry concern is AI taking away jobs. And what we're seeing right now is that is not the case, surprisingly. What we're seeing right now is across the sector is they are using agentic AI to enhance their capabilities as an analyst. So the humans are still in the loop.
Uh-oh.
Well, the agentic AI has struck again. And
That's right. That's right.
yeah, this is good stuff, folks. Well, I'll tell you what, I've got about 1 minute left. I'll just throw some final commentary out there. It is bewildering when you think about how much activity there is. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head at the end there, Matt, when you talked about being able to sort through this just volume after volume of alerts, of different alerts, and using deterministic models. And maybe I'll throw that for a last comment from Mark Madsen. Deterministic models are kind of the old version of AI, right? That this LLM stuff is all stochastic, it's all probabilistic in nature, so it can kind of help you sort through things or do some discovery. But the deterministic models are the ones that can tell you for sure this is the pattern we saw before, do something about it. Final comments from you, Mark.
Yeah, I mean, that's the case with rules, but any model that's being used to detect something like detect fraud or spot a fake 2FA always has errors, right? It's always going to have some amount of error. And so the interesting thing is as volumes go up, as volumes of attacks go up, as volumes of data go up, how you manage, your increase in models and rules, which can lead through, well, when you have I have to take an aside. You have a bunch of models, and now you've got twice as many models because you're looking at a lot more stuff and you're maybe looking more fine-grained. And each one of those has error. But when you add models together, the error rates multiply, which increases your false positive rate, right? And so there's this really difficult balance that you're always dancing around with any kind of work involving models. Even models which are deterministic, if I give you the same input, you get the same output, but there's still a 5% chance of error. So determinism is okay, but it doesn't solve the problem. I just wanted to point that out. And so I am curious if we have time for the answer. Like, how do you manage the increase of detection capabilities in models and queue prioritization and flagging in the face of the increase in false positives?
Yeah, 2 minutes, go for it.
Okay, the 2 minutes. So I'll to try to answer it. Obviously, this is a much longer answer than 2 minutes, but I'll try to answer it at a high level. Really, what we're doing is one, that's where companies really need to work with industry leaders that do this day in and day out. So unless you have a Mark on your team internally at your company, right, that actually understands this technology and some of these serious challenges, you're exactly right. Like that, and it kind of alludes to what we talked about earlier, where you get to a point where these companies collect so many signals that it just causes so many false positives, right? Or they start seeing a scale in their business to where they just keep building rule after rule rule after rule after rule after rule, and or adding a model, right? To go after attack vector. And then before you know it, it's just a complete performance disaster. So one of the things that we see is when we step into a business or a new customer, really what we're doing is we're actually decreasing the amount of models that they're using. We're decreasing the amount of engines. It's not always supplemental or additive. A lot of times it's reducing it and then fitting the right model to solve the right problem. And that is how we kind of fine tune those. How do we squeeze out the highest amount of performance and approvals in their transaction volume while reducing fraud as low as possible? And that's the key answer. Is it's not always additive. A lot of times it's subtractive.
Hmm. That's an excellent answer. Well,
Yeah,
folks, look
that's
these gentlemen
interesting.
up online. Matt Vega of Sardine, just like the food, just like the little fish. That comes from SAR, Suspicious Action Report, Sardine.ai, and we have Mark Madsen of Third Nature. Wow, I'm going to take a while to think about this show. We'll talk to you next week, folks. You've been listening to DM Radio.